Hey everybody, welcome back to Last Night in Vegas. I'm your host, Brian Ortega, and in this episode, we're going to be going and spending a day at the Sportsbook with my dad, Alex Ortega. So, in this particular episode, I'm actually going to be playing the part of my dad, because my dad has actually done a lot of this, where he actually spends time in the Sportsbook for most of the day. I work for a sports betting TV company, so I spend a lot of time in sportsbooks, which is very different than what a normal person would spend in a sportsbook. But I'm taking some of his story and also some of what I've seen in sportsbooks and putting it together for you guys for a sort of firsthand experience of what it's like in the sportsbook. It's a little bit shorter episode in terms of the actual story part, but I'll go ahead and throw on to the end of it. Just sort of like what I expect or what I would like to see in sports books going forward and where I see kind of where that industry is going. So anyways, stick around, and this is A Day at the Sportsbook. My dad, Alex Ortega. It's early morning, the whispers of a casino waking up. You can see the people who haven't gone to sleep yet, and the people who are like me have been up since 8 o'clock and are just waiting and itching to get to the casino. I'm at the South Point, an old-timers place that offers anything a true race and sports bettor could ever ask for. 2 dedicated books that cater to what I like most, horses and sports. South Point is a local spot and caters to low-limit table games players and people like me. But it has all the amenities you could ever ask for. They have an old-school cafe that's open 24 hours a day and serves Chinese food for lunch and dinner. They have a steakhouse, a prime rib restaurant, a god-awful Mexican restaurant, and a sushi spot, of course. They also have one of the best restaurants I've ever been to, and one of the iconic old-school joints of Las Vegas, Michael's. It's delicious and has the class of the 1960s Vegas that is all but extinct in this town. They also have a steak and shake, an oyster bar, and of course, a movie theater. Oh, and let's not forget their $1.25 hot dogs. These are only the food spots. The hotel also has a spa and equestrian center for rodeos and horse shows. Now back to the book. I see about 4 people in the book, one overweight, sits on the far end of the book, poring over the betting sheets for the day's baseball betting card. Another man is standing there at the window, chatting up the teller, as locals usually do. The South Point Sportsbook is pretty old school, but that's what I like about it. So many new sportsbooks look like local bars and grills now. I think it has to do with the boom of legalized sports betting, and since so many people can bet on their phones now, it makes going to the sportsbook somewhat a hassle or a rarity. The operators see it as a way to get you in, make the space feel more approachable like a bar you've had back home. Well, I hate it. I hate that there are less betting windows, that the boards are too small, and some places don't even put the sheets out anymore. I'm looking at you stations, casinos. Now I know what everyone's going to say. Just bet on the app. It's so much more convenient to do it on your phone. Convenience, convenience, convenience. I'll tell you about convenience. I used my BetMGM app in Nevada. I live in Arizona. The woman who signed me up for my account said that I would be able to use it in Arizona and cash out in Arizona. Well, my son, who works in the sports gambling space, had to inform me that this is not how it works. Long story short, I was stuck with $500 in my BetMGM account and couldn't access it in Arizona. I had to go back to Vegas at some point and withdraw my money. That's the reason why I still bet in person with cash. Because it's simple to me. Do I have to come back to the casino if I leave? Sure. But I know that when I get there, that I'm getting my cash and I can do whatever I want with it after that. No fee for withdrawing from my account and no holdup. No problems. Now, talking about the sheets and why the sheets are such a big deal for me, well, I like to have a physical piece of paper in my hand. I want the flexibility to write something down or circle the bet I want. So when you don't have that option for me to use, it just makes me second guess if I really want to bet at your establishment. There are other places in town that try their best to elevate the old school sports betting style. The best in town is obviously Circa. Circa Sportsbooks has the best TV setup, hands down. Some diehards will try to tell you that Westgate or the Wynn have the best, and I'm telling you now that they're wrong. Circa Sportsbooks is fresh, it's clean, it has a great atmosphere for big events, and is the world's largest sportsbook in the world. But even Circa has a couple drawbacks for me. With all those big TVs and upgrades, they have to be able to make a profit somehow, and it's not just from behind the counter either. For prime seating in their center of their sportsbook, they have tables and lounge chairs that you have to pay to sit in. Towards the edges, they also have stadium-style seating that is usually first come, first serve, but on big days, you have to pay for those spots. See, the thing is, I don't need to sit down. I don't mind standing and moving around, but Circa doesn't offer that for me because of its size. I don't fault them for making a buck, it just doesn't fit my style. So at this point, it's around 9:30 in the morning at South Point. I grab the day's sheets for baseball and whatever other sport they might have that day. The amount I bet usually depends on what sports are in season. I love to bet the NFL, and usually when I'm in town, I bet on Saturdays to avoid the lines from the rookies who've never been here before. I grab the sheets and head to the cafe. One of my favorite places because I can walk in solo and sit at the counter and not wait in the extremely long lines to get in. I get eggs with an English muffin and an iced tea to ward off the hangover from the night before. The plan of the day is to get the bets in I need before 11 a.m. when most of the games start for baseball. Then head to the racebook and get down on most of the races as I come in. I like to hang out in the racebook for a couple of reasons. Nobody bothers you over there. You're left alone and everything runs pretty smoothly on that side of the book. I finish off my English muffin and head to the betting window. Cash in one hand and betting sheets in the other. I scan the tellers. Here's a fun fact about me. I try to only go to female tellers. Don't ask me why, but the reasoning's simple. They're better than men. They don't question on what you're saying, and they also type faster. They're usually more courteous and better listeners. I know this isn't scientific, but it works for me. I call it the numbers. 4-4-5 in the over. This is a two-leg parlay, or as I call it, a two-teamer. Depending on how many games are on the card, my bets fluctuate. With a full baseball card and not too many other sports going on, I'll usually bet about $50 to $75 on one game. Then I'll see where it goes from there. This is pretty abnormal because most people who bet daily here at this casino are betting like $5 to $10 a game. So I tend to be treated a little bit better just because the nature of the business. I bet more. If I win, I typically tip pretty good as well. From there, I head to the racebook. Santa Anita's about to go off in about 20 minutes. I grab a beer at the lounge bar next to the poker room and empty showroom. I'll grab the track sheets, and I'll start doing my handicapping. I grab a spot at the end of the bar, and as the bartender, we'll call her Susie, comes over and drops a Michelob Ultra in front of me after telling her from the day before. I put a 20 in the tip glass in front of me and tell Susie I'll be here for a while. I mark off the condition seats and walk over to the tellers. I'm not as picky at the racebook windows as I am at the sportsbook windows. Everyone is equally terrible. There's usually a mix of men and women, usually closer to my age, being in their 50s or 60s behind the counter. Race betting is entirely different than sports betting. It takes a certain someone to be a teller at a race window. You have to be able to understand what the bettor wants and do it quickly. Sometimes the math is difficult, even when the machine is telling you what to do. You'll run into the old-timers who like it the way they like to do it, and then you'll run into the newbies who don't even know where to start. They have to be ready to help anyone at any turn. But don't give them too much credit, because after all, they can be assholes sometimes. So when they try to come back at you as a newbie, you got to straighten them out a little bit. Once they see you know what you're doing, there won't be any problems again. I get the Santa Anita pick 5 in, along with other separate bets I have for the first race. And since I'm at the lounge bar, there are TVs with the early baseball games on, and I've got all the races to my left. I'm set. When you look around the racebook, you'll see all kinds. Below the huge racing mural on the wall, you'll see old white guys buried deep behind a stack of racing forms, old cocktail glasses filled with Diet Coke, and a cloud of smoke swirling above them. This old man might have a buddy who comes up and sees how he's doing. These guys at racebooks rarely hang out outside of the book. They may know every part of their life, but never participate in it. This is where we hang out, and that's fine. Sometimes, like back home at my local OTB, you might find a friend or two. Like my friend Keith, who worked for a pretty famous local car salesman, and he's great people. Most OTBs are where you find the lowest type of people, but sometimes you'll find people who are just like you and love betting horses, and that's the only or closest option to you. That's why when you come to Vegas, it's a little touch of class. When you don't have to worry about someone getting shot minutes before you walk in. Yes, that's happened, but that's another story. My friend Keith has been out to my ranch, and he's come on hunting trips with me. He's a good guy, but he's from Detroit. He's cock-locked and ready to rock if something ever goes down. Speaking of Keith, there he is texting me to see if I have any horses running today. I tell him we don't, but I appreciate him asking. Oh, and that's why I also like the racebook. I'm able to watch my horses run without having to figure out how to find it on my phone or on the computer. After about 3 or 4 beers and about 4 or 5 races, it's time to go for a walk. At South Point, you usually see about 3 types of people. You'll see all the retirees from the local retirement homes in Henderson on their weekly outing to the casino. Black, white, Asian, everyone loves to gamble. The others being locals on their days off, putting in a couple $100s into the slots to hit the big one before they have to clock back in and make their money back on their first day back at work. The other is my favorite. The constant train of small groups of people coming from the neighboring timeshare property next door. They usually are pitching to the folks who get discounted trips and have to do their mandatory tour. They'll say, oh, they have a great bowling alley and a state-of-the-art movie theater here. I've heard it so many times and have thought of what the guests must be thinking. I just have to do this for 1 more hour, and then I'm free. Okay, now that I've finished about 5 beers, it's time for lunch. I don't like doing a big full lunch, but I know that I need to fill up with something. I look over the world-famous hot dog cart in between the 2 sports books, and these are, to me, some of the best hot dogs I've ever had. But what really brings everybody back is the price. It's only $1.25 for a hot dog with all the fixins. The hot dogs are built by 1 of 3 attendants. I like the older Indian woman who works fast and can put together 2 dogs at a time. A funny thing that I learned by talking to someone who knows the hot dog lady is that she was very upset when they took the hot dogs from $1 to $1.25 because it impeded her tips, and that she actually does very well running the hot dog stand because she owns a Mercedes. Let's just say that's a lot of hot dogs. And after talking to this certain someone a little bit longer, I found out that she's a vegetarian. Anything in this town is possible as long as it pays well. Once the early games start and finish around 1 o'clock, it's time to check the winners and reload. I collect the winners and see what we have. If you hang in the sportsbook long enough, you'll see it starts to fill up. You'll see many different types of people. Old men in sloppy colored shirts, overweight guys with coffee stains and a pack of cigarettes in their front pocket. It has to be said, sportsbooks are the most fun and depressing places in the world. Just depends on which side of the spectrum you're on. The amount of energy that you get from big sporting events and the excitement that you can feel is really palpable in the room. But on a random Thursday during the summer when baseball is really the only sport you got going on, you see the most degenerate of degenerates in the world. Guys sitting around talking about the Mets middle reliever, asking questions like what were they thinking taking him out in the 7th, and of course, everybody smokes. For some reason, sports bettors love to smoke. Camels, menthols, vapes, everything. If you spend all day in a sports book and never light up a cigarette, you'll come home and your wife will think you were in a cigarette factory in Virginia rolling those things. I grab another beer and take a seat towards the back of the sports book and settle in to watch a couple innings of the Yankees midday game. A young kid in a jersey and shorts runs up the aisle to the window, out of breath. Did the Yankees game start yet? The teller looks back at the big TV, nods, and says, "Yep, it's right there." The kid made the ultimate East Coast mistake. We watch things early here, kid. On Sundays, this happens more frequently than you think. Here comes this hungover college kid at 11 a.m., casually strolling into the sportsbook, walks up to the teller, no line at all, and says, "Can I get $100 on the Giants?" He'll have a moment of embarrassment when he finds out that they're already down 17-7. Then goes up to his buddy, saying, "Dude, the West Coast sucks. How can games start at 10 a.m. here?" This is obviously the wrong take, as everyone knows the West Coast is the best coast for sports betting and sports in general. The primetime games start at 5 o'clock and are done by 8 or 9, and you have the rest of the night to do whatever you want. On the East Coast, you have to wait all day for the game to start at 8, and then, once it's over, it's already 11 o'clock or 12. What do you do from there? How do you plan your day around that? How do you get to bars at that time? Then once the game is over, you just go home. There has to be an obligatory hangout after the game, right? After a few innings, I head over to see the last race of the Pick 5 at Santa Anita. The race goes off, and I'm locked in. It goes down to the wire, but we didn't have it. Just another day at the sportsbook. The best part of having kids is having them check the tickets at the end of the night. I collect the winners and wake up bright and early the next day to do it all again. Okay, everybody, so you heard sort of a day in the life of someone who goes to the sportsbook pretty frequently. It was a pretty short story just because it all kind of depends on how busy the day is. I wanted to give you sort of an idea of what my dad's regular day is that isn't a day when we have football. Because when we have days that have college football and NFL, it is certainly way more exciting. But I actually just wanted to show you what it's like on a daily basis, because you get very different, unique people when you go on days that it is not a normal day. Because obviously, when you go for college football or a Sunday, it is a much more exciting place, obviously. But you get a lot of the casual people who walk in, and it's actually really hard to do sort of observations of people when they're there for, at their most exciting. So I always think it's fun to sort of capture the sort of mundane sort of day it is of a sports book, just because you have to find so much to entertain yourself with, and you get to sort of explore and sort of sometimes talk to different people. I'm not a big talker at sports books. Probably the most annoying question is when somebody asks you, who do you have? Leave me alone. It's a very innocent question. I totally get it, but it's just one of the most annoying questions that you have, because then you'll tell somebody and they say, oh, well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. Maybe bet the other side then. So it's always kind of one of those funny things, but my dad loves going to sports books. Usually because I'm in a sports book most of the day, I usually don't want to hang out in a sports book most of the time, just because, again, it's just like when you go to work, you probably don't want to go hang out at work again. Obviously, some people love what they do. If you work on a movie set, I would love to be on a movie set all the time. That sounds great. But for things like this, I just wanted to sort of highlight that. But you do get a lot of what I talked about in the story itself. You get a lot of people who are there on the daily, especially at local casinos. So places like South Point would be considered a local casino. You tend to see a lot of the same people, a lot of the same faces, and some people are retired, and that's kind of just what they like to do. They like to hang out in the casino. They're going to watch sports. Sometimes they'll socialize because they'll run into a lot of people who are there with them. Sometimes they're workers. Sometimes they're fellow people sitting in the sports book. That's their friend group, so sometimes that's where it's at. Sometimes they won't gamble as much. Like I said, most people who gamble in casinos or at sports books, at normal sports books, they're usually betting like $5, $10, $15 a game. It's usually not absorbent amounts that you see that are covered on social media or on like the news, where people are betting millions of dollars, which obviously happens, but not on a daily basis. You usually have people here trying to, just kill time. So usually they'll put a little bit of money on the games. But again, sports books like the South Point are somewhat what I like to see. I can't tell you what my ideal sports book would look like, because I actually enjoy watching games at home. I like watching it with the sound on. I usually can key on one game, and that's where I like to watch it. But in terms of what I would expect from a nice sports book, I wish I could take pieces of different sports books and put them together. I would definitely say that Circa Sportsbook is very much an ideal sports book for most people. It has big, very bright screens. They do have a side of the sports book that is dedicated just for the lines for the games, which sometimes you don't have to grab a whole sheet. You want to be able just to look up at the board, have the number ready, and then tell them what you want at the teller. They also have plenty of, self-serve kiosks where you can make the bets on your own. Of course, they have places to sit. If you have a large group, this is a great option, of course. And of course, they have the stadium-style seating if you're somebody who wants to sit in a seat and have a view of any of the games. The one thing that I would probably change about the sportsbook at Circa is actually nothing about the TVs, nothing about that particular layout. But they do have a row of video poker machines on the very first floor where you walk up to the sports book. I would actually love to see that turned into a bar instead of a video poker station, just because you get a lot of people who will take up that space, which honestly, that's what it's there for, and people probably will play video poker and watch games at the same time, so you're making revenue double essentially, but I have a way that you can make more money off of that space, and that is by putting a bar there. There's probably been research done for that particular space that makes it a little bit more difficult to make that happen. Just sort of as I'm talking it through, that space tends to be a crunch point that tends to have a lot of people that sort of stand in that particular area and will block that space, which makes it a little bit more difficult to maneuver around that. And when you add a bar, obviously people are going to be wanting to get drinks at the bar, so it's going to create more of sort of a crunch spot, which would make it difficult. But I think it would be great to have the bar there, and then sort of as you have the bar, then you have the stools, and then they can watch the games while they're drinking, and even if you want, add video poker as well. This would obviously have to change the entire sort of area, because you'd have to push the slot machines back, and from there it just sort of just pushes everything down. So I totally get why they don't do it, but I think that would be my idea of what to put there. But again, it's a lot of logistics that go into sort of forming this tiny little space. But I get to sit in the studio and watch the games anyways, so no big deal. But I think it's actually one of the better setups of the way that I like it. I like big TVs, flat, flush against the wall. South Point doesn't do that for me, just because they have sort of their set screens of what they have in those big. They have like 4 big screens and then a bunch of little TVs to go around it, but really you're watching those 4 big screens. So again, that's just me personally. Some people love I mentioned in the story, some people love the bar and grill setup. I'm not a fan of that setup, just because I grew up going to the old school sports books with a big TV, the big tote board on the right or the left or in the center, whatever you have you. That's how I grew up watching sports in sports books. But a lot of people now, they want to be able to eat, drink, be more of like a sports bar vibe. And really, a lot of sports books, as they come online, are going to start using this model more. It's just an easy way to integrate sports betting with sports watching, or the old school way of sports of watching sports. It's all about really creating an atmosphere that is not intimidating. The biggest reason why people don't like to gamble in person or don't like to gamble at sports books is the intimidation factor. Like you have to look at the board and have to say the number and all this, which honestly you don't really have to do anymore. A lot of people will just say, "Oh, I want to bet on the Patriots," and their touchscreen will tell them what to bet. But it's the intimidation factor, and it just feels really big for some people. And if you're going to watch games, that's cool, but betting it, some people don't like that. So they try to sort of meet you halfway by making these sports books sort of like the Park MGM, or even like Treasure Island, for example. And a lot of places, honestly, like if you go over to the Durango Sportsbook, to be more of like a restaurant with a bar. And oh yeah, we also have sports betting too. So I think it's always looking for ways to maximize that space. And sportsbook players, honestly, can be kind of draining. They just sit in the sportsbook, smoke their cigarettes, drink their free drinks that we used to get all the time, and call it a day. And that's it. And so we're just kind of wasting space. And that's the way that the operators will look at it as. Because you have to understand that sportsbooks don't make a lot of money for casinos. They typically only make like less than 2% of what the casino makes in the entire casino. And that includes slot machines, table games, so on and so forth. So a lot of times sports books are looked as amenities rather than money makers. Just because, for example, if you bet on one side in the Super Bowl and the other side wins, well, you want to keep it about even. So really the sportsbook only wins about half of that money bet on that game, because the other half, if they were doing their jobs right, the other half wins. So really it's like breaking even, almost 50-50. So as a business, you don't want those returns. You want big returns. And one way to do that is to put a sports book along with a restaurant and a bar inside of your sports booking space. So again, the way that I like to watch sports at sports books is kind of changing. So I kind of have to just deal with that. But I just wanted to let you guys know that's kind of how I, view sports books. I do think that Circa Sportsbook at Circa is probably one of the better ones in town. Westgate is also good. A lot of old timers will say that Westgate is the best. You'll know that back in the day, whenever they used odds from Vegas, they would use Westgate's odds. The reason for that was because Westgate would have the odds up the quickest. They usually had the largest markets, and they usually were not afraid to venture into more unique props that were allowed by the Nevada Gaming Commission. It should also be noted, speaking of the Gaming Commission, that you don't always get the same type of bets here in Nevada that you get in other states, like, let's just say, New York or Massachusetts or places like this, because Colorado is a great example, where you're able to do all these different markets and all these different, fun player props. They're not always available here in Nevada. So when you come here, just know that you sometimes won't be able to make that same game parlay with a certain player. So it's one of those things where when you're the first one, you have sort of this established ecosystem of how you're supposed to operate. You kind of sometimes get lost when the competitors are allowed to finally compete and you're not equipped to do that. So again, it's one of those things that Vegas has to sort of think about when they build their sports books, that, maybe we don't need the Nevada Gaming Commission for regulating sports betting anymore, now that it's legal in about 38 states, I believe, at this point. So quite a few. So honestly, I love talking about my dad. Coming to Vegas is really because my dad loves visiting and coming here all the time. Usually what happens, as you found out at the end of the story, that he kind of just continues the day. He usually goes to bed pretty early. He's usually like a 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in bed kind of person. That doesn't change when he comes to Vegas. It's very, very rare. If he stays in a hotel, he will, because he's able to walk out of the hotel room and go straight into the casino. That's easy. But if he stays with me at my place, he typically has to, get driven here because we don't like him drinking and driving. We don't want to condone that either. So we'll go ahead and usually call us, or we'll, show up at a certain time knowing that he's ready to go. We'll walk in. Sometimes we'll eat dinner at the restaurant at the hotel. So typically, if we're at South Point, he loves to go to the prime rib restaurant or the steakhouse and order the split pea soup, which is hilarious because hopefully my dad is listening to this pod because I told him to listen to it, is that we always get annoyed, me and my mom, because he always wants to eat at the same place at South Point at a steak or prime rib restaurant and order the split pea soup, which is always hilarious to us. We always think it's so funny. So we typically will we'll eat the split pea soup, and then we go on with our day. So we try to always make sure that happens at least once during the trip, because my mom does like to try a lot of different restaurants. I like to take her to different restaurants. So I always try to make my parents try something a little bit new when they visit Vegas, just because we have so many different awesome restaurants here in town. So I just want them to try it. And I want to try it too, so that's a little selfish. But anyways, always have to go to the prime rib restaurant or the steakhouse. They're both very delicious, really, really good. I really enjoy South Point as a casino. I don't like to hang out there all day because we used to have a studio that was there, so I was there all day. And again, it's my local casino, so I can go there really anytime. I usually go there for the movies. That's kind of my big thing. But it's really a great casino in general. And I think it is awesome that they do have two separate sports books for for horse betting, and then also for sports betting as well. So I think that's cool, especially for my dad. That's very helpful, especially if he has a horse running, because he owns horses, to be able to just go down to the sports book, be able to watch the race, and it's totally fine. Also, the parking's free, but I would like it to be known that it is not easy to park, especially on big holiday weekends like Memorial Day or Labor Day or any of these 3-day weekends, because then I have to rush there, try to find parking, and then find the game that's on at that time. So anyways, that was our Day at the Sportsbook episode. If you guys have any questions about this episode, feel free to, reach out to me anytime, and I'll be able to try to respond as fast as possible. But again, thank you so much, everybody, for listening to the pod. We'll be back next week with another location, hopefully a restaurant or something like that, that I'll be able to review and tell you sort of the experiences. But again, thank you so much for listening. Follow us on all of our socials, conciergeconfidential_LV, or on TikTok or Twitter, which is at Keys to Vegas, or me on my personal Instagram, Brian_Ortega26. And then you can see kind of what I'm up to on there. So again, thank you so much for listening to Last Night in Vegas. If you see me out in town, come over and say hello. Maybe we'll buy you a drink. But remember, keep it confidential.